Hello everyone, today you will hear an interesting story. Boris's day went bad as the sailor was scattered and forgetful. The bright instrument lighting annoyed him too much. "Seems like you're not in a good mood today," said the ship mechanic as he passed by. Boris shrugged. He didn't want to talk about anything, and anxious thoughts settled in his head. The fact is, his wife had started behaving strangely. Usually when Boris was on a voyage, he communicated with his wife using video. But that day Lena had written, "Sorry dear, but I'm busy now. Let's communicate tomorrow." "Why?" inquired Boris. "I've got things to do," answered his wife. Dismay settled in Boris, but not only that, irritation mixed with it. "I need to pull myself together," decided Boris, as he peered into the darkness of the Atlantic Ocean through the wide windows of the deckhouse. Of course the dismay didn't leave Boris, but the irritation decreased. Besides, saving thoughts appeared in the sailor's head. They were like, perhaps Lena really couldn't communicate with me using video. She's a bookkeeper, anything could happen. It helped, but not completely. Anyway, Boris defended his watch and went to the cabin. And in the morning, he had an opportunity to talk with Lena using video. "Hi dear," she said kindly, and her mouth broke into a smile. "Hi," said Boris. He was standing on the starboard wing of the ship bridge. Nothing prevented him from talking with his wife, as the sunshine was covered by the deckhouse. Boris could see his wife's face distinctly. Lena, like incidentally, looked away and smiled again. Night dismay reminded itself, though Boris didn't show that to Lena. He also smiled and told her about another typical day which he had spent on the vessel. While talking, he kept a close eye on his wife's gestures. Several times she looked away, sometimes she took a thought and answered at random. Some gestures were too jerky. "Looks weird," Boris thought. "She didn't behave like this earlier." And again, he tried to comfort himself with the assumption that Lena had problems at work. But it didn't work out. Instead of irritation, Boris felt depression. Things were going slowly, as Boris didn't respond to orders immediately. He barely defended the day watch. And then in the evening, his wife couldn't talk to Boris using video again. "Hi, how are you?" she wrote on Messenger. "Sorry, no video communication today. I've got too much to do. We'll talk tomorrow morning." "I'm fine," answered Boris, and he felt growing dismay, and added today everything was typical. And in the morning there was a video conversation. Everything was like a day before. Lena behaved in a strange way, with the same nervous gestures, head turns, and ridiculous answers. This went on for several days. Boris tried not to tell anybody about his family issues, but then he broke down and shared his problem with the ship mechanic. "Maybe she cheats on you," said the mechanic while drinking tea at the starboard rail. "She never did that." Boris got indignant, but not too much, because he understood the mechanic could be right. The mechanic continued, "Think, man, we spend months on voyages and rarely come home. So what do women do without us? They cheat on us." "Ah, get off?" Boris went to the deckhouse. "I have an acquaintance who is a detective," the mechanic cried after him. In his cabin, Boris pondered the mechanic's words nervously. He realized again that the mechanic was right. Sailors rarely came back home, and their wives were often left to themselves. They could do whatever they wanted. Boris recalled the captain's story. When he had once returned from a voyage, he had met his wife with another man. That man had nearly been murdered. Fortunately, the wife's lover had noticed a wrench in the captain's hands and jumped out of the window. The captain's flat was on the first floor, so the wife's lover hadn't been injured. "He wouldn't run away from me," Boris thought with pleasure. He remembered his flat on the second floor and the concrete yard with no plants or trees. And what if my wife does have someone? Boris thought as if someone had asked from outside. And Boris ran to the starboard side, where he had recently spoken with the ship mechanic. Of course there was no mechanic in that place. Then Boris ran to the engine room. "Have you seen Glebov?" he asked a sailor who was in his third voyage of life. The answer was negative, so Boris had to run deeper inside the vessel. He wandered through the bowels of the bulk carrier for a long time, and finally found the mechanic on the lower deck. "Here you are, Tolik." "Later." "I'm busy now," said the mechanic, who was working on something. "Damn it," Boris shouted in his thoughts. Then he went to his cabin. He only saw Glebov after supper shortly before his night watch. Glebov, you were looking for me today, weren't you? Glebov started first. I was. You told me recently that you knew a detective whom I could hire. Yes, I know one detective, and you have decided to hire him, haven't you? I have. Please give me his contact information. Glebov gave it to him, and Boris began his communication with the detective. Good evening, the detective answered. What can I do for you? Boris mustered up the courage and wrote, I need to check if my wife has a lover. Typically, replied the detective and informed Boris about the money he would need to pay in advance. Boris was surprised and wanted to reply, it's too much, but he decided not to do that. Instead, he just agreed with everything. Then the detective gave payment details and declared, after I have received the money, tomorrow I'll get down to business. And the detective did just that. First of all, he inspected the yard, where there was nothing except for concrete. However, there was a very handy lamppost just in front of Boris's flat. It's probably nice to live there, thought the detective. Then he started figuring out how to install a video camera and realized it was impossible without the help of specially trained people. The detective didn't want to attract too much attention, so he moved away and looked at Boris's flat again. The strange thing was, the windows were covered with curtains, even though there were no houses on the other side of the yard and the sun wasn't shining into the windows. The detective checked the cameras in the pockets of his jacket and started waiting for the right moment to enter the house. Such a moment came in an hour. The wait wasn't too tedious, but the detective was a bit nervous because each new deal is a new risk, though the salary is good. Following a woman, the detective entered the house, went up to the second floor, and hid one of his cameras behind the ventilation grill. The camera was small and black, making it hard to notice, and at that moment he almost revealed himself. The door of a nearby flat, not Boris's, opened, and an old lady went out to the stairs. She stared at the detective, said hello, and asked, "Are you a new boyfriend of that bitch?" She nodded at the flat in front. "Get out of here or I'll call the police. Everyone hangs around here while her husband is at the sea." Then the detective showed his ID. The old lady looked at it carefully and said, "Mikhail Zoryev, the detective." "That's right. I'm just working on the Boris Valerianov case." "What has he done?" The old lady was frightened. "He has done nothing. He just suspects his wife of cheating." "Ah, that's it. One fat bastard in a tailcoat visits her almost every day. He parks his car under my balcony and is often angry when I hang up my wet clothes after washing. You see, he doesn't like when drops are falling on his car." "Tell me about the car if you can." "What is it?" "Oh, Mikhail, I don't know its model. The car is big, black, and looks like an SUV. Don't you remember the license plate?" No, that's the thing I really don't remember." "Then, please, note down my phone number and call me if you notice something suspicious." The old lady noted down the detective's phone number and promised, "I'll definitely help you." "Then what's your name?" asked Mikhail. "Marina Lukyanova." "Goodbye, Marina." The old lady called Mikhail that evening. "Detective Zoryev is listening." "Good evening, it's Marina Lukyanova, Boris Valerianov's neighbor." "Hi, I'm glad to hear you," rejoiced Mikhail. "Well, he's just arrived, Alina's lover. Just like earlier, he has parked his car under my balcony." "But when did he arrive?" "Just recently. He's near his car, and Alina is with him. Fine, I'll call you later." He hung up and opened an application using which he could control the video camera. Now he had to wait. Finally, the couple appeared, Alina and her lover. The lover was a tall, fat man in a black tailcoat. He led Lena to the door, and then they started kissing. Not like friends, but on the lips. Busted assholes. Pretty, thought Mikhail. He was sitting in the park a few blocks from Boris's home. He decided to hurry up to the yard. While walking, Mikhail followed the camera, but it showed nothing interesting. After the kiss, the couple entered Boris's flat. In the yard, Mikhail noticed the car of Lena's lover. It was a black crossover Toyota with rogue number plates. Mikhail took a picture of the license plates on his smartphone and walked away from the house. The windows in Boris's flat were still curtained, but the light was on, and Mikhail noticed two silhouettes. According to their movements, they were going to spend a passionate night. Then they kissed and went into bed, not to sleep, of course. Mikhail entered the house. The door had been opened by Marina Lukyanova, and he leaned his ear to the door of Boris's flat. He heard groans and screams. It seemed that Lena and her lover were satisfying each other in the most natural way in the world. That's it. Mikhail mentally smiled and asked his colleagues to find out the full dossier of the person who has a crossover with such number plates. The number plates were sent by messenger. The reply came in 10 minutes. It appeared that Lena's lover was Nikolai Dolbanov, a small businessman. Mikhail also received the home address and the address of the chief office of Dolbanov's company. "Thanks," wrote Mikhail and sent his colleagues some money as a reward. Then he gave some money to Marina. "I ask you only one thing, not to tell anyone," guessed the old lady. "I wasn't going to tell anyone except for Boris," replied Mikhail. "Yes, Miss Lukyanova, now it's better to keep silence." "Don't worry about that. Do you want to have tea with pies?" "I've got no time, miss. Also, Lena's lover can leave at any moment, and we might meet each other. As you can see, that'll cause me troubles. But he won't leave until morning." Mikhail pondered and decided, "All right, thank you, I will. Just don't talk about it either. I have no choice anyway." In Marina's flat, Mikhail contacted Boris using video. While Mikhail was conducting his investigation, Boris couldn't find his place. He felt nothing except for desperate anxiety. He did his work anyhow, ate and drank through force, had a bad sleep, and he was surprised that Mikhail had finished so quickly. "Good evening," said Mikhail using video communication. "Are you ready to talk?" "Of course I'm ready. Good evening. Well, unfortunately you were right. Your wife does have a lover." "Bitch." Boris punched the deckhouse with all his might. "I'm sorry. Now, I'll send you the most important paragraphs of your wife's lover's dossier. His name is Nikolai Dolbanov. He's a small businessman." "Thank you very much. Now I'll pay for your work, the whole amount of money." Boris paid for the detective's work, studied Dolbanov's dossier, and started to live with an expectation of revenge. The way home would take 2 months, and during this time much could happen. It appeared that there was nobody to take revenge on returning home. Boris saw some news. They said that Nikolai Dolbanov was taken by the police due to fraud, and he would spend the next few years in prison. "Well, I'll meet you when you're free," thought Boris. Looking ahead, it's time to mention that in 3 months, Dolbanov would commit suicide, and again Boris would have nobody to take revenge on. Boris didn't meet his wife at home. Marina Lukyanova said that this bitch had met someone else. The wife's new lover turned out to be an electrician, but he also abused alcohol. "I wish her to go to hell," said Boris indifferently, although inside he was all tense. "That bitch knows how to find her own adventures," he thought. He had already calmed down. He had nothing left for this woman. He no longer cared about her. Lena returned home in the evening. She was drunk and trashy, and the sailor said, "We'll soon divorce." "Very well," barely standing on her feet, said the wife. "Overnight in another place." It turned out quite abruptly, but Boris even rejoiced at such a tone. It took 2 months for them to divorce. All this time Lena was drunk, but Boris had no care for that. He knew very well that in life there is always a reckoning. Soon his ex-wife finally drank herself to death. And in a few days after Lena's death, her new lover was hit by a road train. He also died. Boris decided to completely change his place of residence and place of work. He chose Istanbul as his new city. He began to work at a tug. A few more years passed. Boris married a beautiful woman, and they had a wonderful son. In the service, he had already risen to the rank of captain. And all was well with him. Dear listeners, your support is very important to us. If you like our story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's very motivating for us. We need your feedback to improve our content.